Lesson 5. Even laws in the present state of human consciousness govern this world. Of those 7 laws, 3 are eternal, immutable, laws of the absolute, and 4 are transitory, mutable, laws of the relative. The 3 laws of the absolute. 1. Life, mind, truth, love, spirit, is all in all. 2. The same law governs always everything, everywhere, in the same way, from the greatest ST down to the smallest electron. 3. Everything is vibration. In the absolute, those 3 laws are one law, called the Great Law. To our present state of consciousness, that one great universal law manifests itself as a triune ray. We perceive it in its threefold aspect, our consciousness acting as a prism. Therefore, as we are studying these laws now, we must consider them as they appear to us at present. All in all, these 5 which were explained in the first lesson are the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end of everything. They are a law by themselves, the law of life, of mind, of truth, of love, which is the law of spirit. They include everything, and that is why Jesus, who knew these laws, said, "Love thy God, the great principle, with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength, and love thy neighbor as thyself." And when he was asked further, "What about the other commandments?" he answered, "All the laws and all the prophets are in those 2 commandments. The great principle, the absolute, is all life, all mind, all truth, all love, all spirit. All there is in the great all. And if we apply that law, the law of life, of mind, of truth and of love, to all problems of our daily life, we work out, without noticing it, all the perfection we can ever aspire to. We build up the pyramid of our own life and reach the point of spirit. And we do not notice how it happens, because it is the great principle itself who is working to that end through us. It is its work as much as ours. All we have to do is to be conscious, open channels for that. Wonderful simplicity of that universal law is that there is but one law which underlies all other laws, operates on all planes, and expresses itself through everything, always in the same way. The formation of the electron, of the atom, of the body, of our planet, of this world, of the universe, are all based on that one law. Everywhere is seen the operation of that law, which is also called the law of analogy. As it is on the highest plane, so it is on the lowest. That is, that one pattern is expressed through millions of aspects and yet is always one. For instance, let's take the sphere. An electron is a microscopical sphere. Vapors are made up of tiny spheres of water. A dewdrop is a sphere, and so are the particles of mercury or the little red and white corpuscles in our blood. A soap bubble is a sphere, our Earth also, and all other planets, the sun, the stars, and the worlds. Why? Because the great law says that everything which wants to persevere in existence must take the form of a sphere, which is a body in which all parts are in perfect relation one to another and also to its center, and which therefore is so perfectly balanced that it can offer the maximum resistance to all kinds of outside disintegrating influences. Another example, all vibrations emanate from a given point in all directions in waves, forming continually increasing spheres. A stone thrown in the water starts spherical vibratory waves, which, where they touch the surface of the water, appear as circles, enlarging till they reach the shore of that body of water. It is the same with all other vibrations, sound, light, Hertzian waves, magnetic waves, also thoughts and spiritual vibrations. All this again because of the great law, which decrees that all vibrations must normally proceed in waves, forming continually increasing spheres which are kept in that condition by the law of attraction perpetually operating through those vibrations. That law is so infinite, so universal, that in our present mental development we can only begin to perceive its numberless manifestations. That law is often also called the Great Law. The knowledge of that law enables one to calculate with mathematical precision even things the nature of which is as yet unknown to us. Geometry, mathematics, all exact sciences, have the Great Law as foundation of their individual laws. For instance, 3 times 3 makes 9, and 3 million times 3 million makes also 9 plus as many zeros as there are zeros in the two numbers. Why is it so? Because of the Great Law expressing itself through the mathematical laws. Those who study zoology also discover very soon the various manifestations of the Great Law. There are so-called wild animals, lions, tigers, panthers, and so forth. Their coats are of certain colors, arranged in certain designs, which are expressing their qualities. The same characteristics are found among birds of prey, eagles, hawks, owls, etc., as these occupy amongst the birds the corresponding place to that occupied by wild animals among the beasts. It is the same among fishes, insects, mushrooms, trees, plants, and minerals. The same distinguishing color schemes, the same combinations, throughout the whole round of nature. Take the rainbow, that wonderful bridge, shining with the 6 colors of the spectrum and connecting heaven with earth. Its iridescence, produced by the refraction of light, is found on the soap bubble, on oil-coated water, in the diamond, also in the opal, that stone both precious and mysterious. It is displayed on the wings of certain butterflies, on different insects, on birds, and even in the hair of human beings, where there is a certain iridescence. Why? Again, because of the Great Law. Throughout the whole cycle of creation are everywhere seen these wonderful expressions of the Great Law. Infinite are the aspects through which it continually manifests itself. There is the glorious sunset, wonderful colors in the sky, but the sun's rays have no color, they are white. The clouds have no color, they are also white. The air has no color, it is transparent. Yet taken together in a certain combination, they all make a wonderful sunset. It is the relation of the different lights one to another, shades and lights, white rays broken up in different rays, interpenetrating and combining one with another, colorless elements, yet producing the most wonderful colors. All this is the result of that one great law. All is vibration. This is the third and last of these absolute, immutable laws. Is it possible that vibrations will be eternal? They will be, as they always have been. Even spirit itself communicates through vibrations. Maybe someday they will be called by another name, but it is not the name which is so important. It is the nature of the thing itself. The whole universe is but vibration. When we speak, the sound is conveyed through vibrations. Through vibrations do we also see, smell, taste, and touch. Everything is done through vibration. Sound is vibration. Light is vibration. So are the emanations of radium, wireless telegraphy, telephony. All use vibrations as agents. Thoughts also are vibrations. So is love. Everything is vibrating. Vibrations are penetrating all planes, and therefore even in the absolute, everything is vibration. There are different traits of vibrations, infinite varieties of them, some so high, so subtle, that of them we cannot have any concept just now. All is eternal vibration because vibration is life itself, and life is one. The fundamental aspects the absolute, the great principle. The operation of this law is explained in detail in the second, fourth, sixth, and seventh lessons. The four laws of the relative, the law of polarity, the law of rhythm, the law of gender, the law of cause and effect, the law of polarity. Everything in this world in the present state of human consciousness appears to have two poles, the positive and the negative poles, good and evil, heaven and hell, life and death, light and darkness, day and might, white and black, south and north, peace and war, yes and no, positive and negative, etc. Everywhere, no matter where we turn, there is that law of polarity or duality. It is the law of the pairs of opposites. Any opposites, even men and women, come under that law. It is a very important law, which pervades the whole world. 11 is a law which we think we cannot master, to which we must submit, as it has taken possession not only of the physical but also of the mental plane. In the most ancient religions, the law of duality or polarity is manifested, prevalent. There are the days and nights of Brahma, the absolute, Manavantharas and Pralayas, periods of activities and periods of rest, periods of manifestation and periods of non-manifestation, periods of being and periods of non-being. It is believed to be an immutable law, a law of the absolute, but that is not correct. In one of the sacred books of the Hindus, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, the one who knew, when speaking about the absolute, about divinity, said that God is above the pairs of opposites. That means above the law of duality or polarity. The law of duality therefore cannot be a divine law if God is above it, because God and divine laws must be one. Unity is the law up the absolute. Yet religious, philosophical and sometimes scientific teachings are based on the law of duality. As long as the law of duality, or polarity, will be accepted as an immutable law, it will keep this world enslaved. Peace and harmony will remain but a beautiful dream, because that law means a continual warfare between the two principles, the positive and the negative, and there is the question, which one of them will win? One will for a time, and under those conditions, harmony can never be attained. When opposites are coming together, they emphasize each other's opposition. It is only like which attracts like, and thus becomes one whole. There is no possible unity between two opposites. In it is one of the most subtle and powerful laws on earth, that law of polarity or duality. It is not an eternal law, despite the assertions of some of the oldest religions and greatest philosophies. Humanity is hypnotized by it, and as long as human beings will submit themselves to that law, it will operate and they will always be swinging between life and death, good and evil, peace and war, and so forth. If we analyze that law from the point of view of science, we find that it is not a true law. We say there is light and there is darkness, yet this is not a correct statement. There is only light. Darkness is but a suppositional absence of light. There is no such thing as real darkness, because light vibrations penetrate everywhere. We think that light is only what we see, yet we perceive only the range of rays from red to violet, that is, the 6 colors of the spectrum. There are also rays below the red and beyond the violet which we do not see, and those invisible rays are the most powerful. Light visible and invisible is everywhere. Therefore there is no darkness. There are only degrees and different kinds of light. All is light. Even that seemingly utter darkness and void of the interstellar space is penetrated by vibrations, invisible to the human eye, of the absolute light, which is attraction or love. The same with good and evil. There is no absolute evil. There are only conditions of relativity, of good. There is the ultimate good, and there is the very first starting point of good, and naturally there is all the scale to develop from the point to the infinite. It is obvious that if the point and the infinite are placed together, the contrast is so great that they appear to be opposites. Yet such a comparison is not right, as there is all the infinite number of links between them, each successive link being a part of that endless chain or circle which has no beginning nor end. This scientific fact cannot be ignored. Good, taken from the scientific point of view, is everywhere, omnipresent. There are degrees of good, that is all, but no evil. Evil is but a suppositional absence of good, therefore non-existing, as good is all-pervading. The same is found to be true with every other pair of opposites which one begins to analyze. Soon the fact is discovered that it is only the positive which has a real existence. The bath has two poles. One is called the North and the other the South Pole. The South Pole is a high mountain, the North Pole is a cavity. But we call them North and South Poles because we imagine that there is a top and there is a bottom. If we change our position, then really the North Pole would be below and the South Pole above. One must try to visualize those things also from the point of view of the absolute and not only from that of the relative. Scientifically speaking, there is no east or west as a definite location. It is but a direction pointed out by the magnetic needle, relative to the point from which one is taking it. When we are in China, the east will be in America, but when we are in Europe, America becomes west to us and China would then be east. These are only human concepts, created and used by us to distinguish the unlimited with our limited perception. To find, to direct ourselves in the infinite, which has no direction. There is the yes in Mo. How few people know that as soon as we make a positive statement and say, yes, I am going to do that, immediately from somewhere out of the unknown arises the silent opposition or no. And it works so strongly against us that we usually then have all kinds of difficulties in performing that which we intended to do. Why does it happen? Because of the law of polarity. The law of polarity continually interferes with all our human affairs. That is why we are all the time swinging between good and evil, between hope and fear, between success and failure. There is another law still worse which usually works together with the law of polarity, and that is the so-called law of rhythm. Both are there, ready to stop all human endeavors, to destroy our works, and thus prevent us from progress. A great many people have had experience in that direction, and they have grown, we say. They never will say, I am going to do that. They say, I am going to try / because they have noticed that as soon as they make a positive statement, something seems to be continually interfering with it. Yet nothing of that kind happens if a neutral form of speech is used. What is the reason? Why does the negative seem to be so strong when the positive should be the stronger? When we make an individual statement, a positive one, we simply state the positive from our human point of view. We back it up only by our own limited forces. It is just as circumscribed as we humanly are circumscribed. Yet it is not a little part of the negative, but the whole of it, which the law of polarity causes to rise automatically each time as a negation, in opposition to our positive statement. That is why it is so overwhelming. Just as the whole of the ocean striking a little piece of wood carries it away, so the whole of the negative, in which humanity believes and utterly fears, sweeps away and destroys our individual positive statements. Yet, positive statements can be made in such a way that nothing can destroy them. If we say with God's help or with the help of the great law, I am going to do that, Such a statement covers the whole ground, because neither God nor the great law have opposites. Satan once attempted to oppose divinity, but that opposition proved itself a complete failure. The world is not divided between good and evil. The great principle is the only one, and it is all. Therefore, when we place the absolute or the great law behind our statements, we can make any statement we want, because there is no possible opposition to those two. Another way to neutralize that law of polarity is continually to refuse to see the negative, always to place the weight in the positive scale, to try to see, even in things most unpleasant, something good. Thus we cast the weight in the right scale, in the positive, and the result is that by and by the law of polarity will be neutralized, and finally will cease to operate in our lives at all. Then, only the positive will come to us. Usually there is always the negative coming together with the positive because of that very law of polarity. But when we will have overcome that law, we will realize that there are no opposites anymore, no days and nights, but, metaphorically speaking, only an eternal day. In the Revelation, the inspired writer, when describing the holy city, which lies foursquare, that is, the realm of perfection, says there is no night there. There is no negative, no law of polarity in the absolute. There all is unity. We must not only affirm good, but see good, know good, not try to excuse evil, but to explain it. We must, through our own reasoning process, see the real motive behind everything, and then we will always find something positive. There is never a complete absence of good. When we make statements in our daily life, we must be positive, but positive with the great law behind us to back up our words. We should recognize the law of polarity only to the extent of endeavoring to overcome it, and we should always know it to be a temporary mutable law above which we must someday rise. When we overcome that law, we rise to a power unknown to us now, because so great. The best way to get rid of something negative is first to detect it, second, not to fear it, and finally, to destroy it by realizing its non-existence in the realm of eternal harmony. Simply to close one's eyes and say there is no such thing as evil is not practical at all, as that very thing will then usually happen, precisely because of the operation of the law of polarity. If we want to do something, let us to it, and know that there is the great law behind us, which will give us aid and assistance in all that is right. Everybody knows how difficult it is to keep a secret. It seems to be burning on one's lips. One is almost compelled to give it away. Why? Because of the law of polarity. When we are told not to tell, the silent opposition, due to the continual operation of the law, says, do tell, and we usually yield to that silent command. People call it temptation, the voice of evil. In reality, it is but the working of the law of polarity. Very often we find ourselves undecided as to what we have to do. Why is it? Again, because of the law of polarity. We take a decision, and as soon as we take one, we almost regret that we did it. With some people, that law of polarity is working so strongly that they are always undecided as to what they shall do. It is not because they cannot decide, for they can decide, but because they are so subject to that law of polarity, so one with it, that whenever they make a decision, immediately there arises the silent opposition which makes them change their decision and take another one. As soon as they have taken that new decision, the old one comes up again, and so on, until by an effort of willpower, they keep to one. Take people who have what is called the spirit of contradiction. Whenever we begin a conversation with them, they must always contradict what we say. They like to argue, because of the law of polarity. They argue sometimes against their own convictions. They cannot help it. We can try them with a little experiment, which shows how the law of polarity is working. When they start to argue, concentrate for a few moments and silently deny the law, deny its power, and affirm unity, harmony, so as to cast the weight into the scale of the positive. Then probably the individual, instead of continuing to argue, will say, "What is the use of arguing?" There we have not only a good example of how to get the best of somebody's spirit of contradiction, but also, and what is more important, of how to overcome the law back of it. And when we do that, we must not say, even mentally, to the individual that he is not going to argue. That mental process must be done within ourselves impersonally, entirely forgetting about the person who does the arguing. Action and reaction is another manifestation of the same law. When people have been going for some time in one direction and have reached a certain limit, they turn suddenly hack and go in the opposite direction, to return again to the first one, and so on indefinitely. That is especially noticeable in all kinds of religious, scientific or political movements. After a great spiritual uplift, the people get very realistic. After a very materialistic age, the people again are seeking something spiritual. The reason why it is so difficult sometimes to work in certain directions is because with each step one takes forward, there is that tendency to go backward, due to the law of polarity, in connection with which usually operates also the so-called law of rhythm. Students of psychology know well that peculiarity of the human character. Yet that characteristic of most human beings is not an integral part of them. It is but the law of polarity expressing itself through human channels, who, in most cases, not knowing how to rise above that law, become helpless tools in its hands. Therefore, it is very important for us to study, to analyze that law and to learn how to master it. The law of polarity was first brought down into involution by mind itself. It is its creation, its own child. Later on, however, that law grew so strong that it subdued its own creator and became one of the most relentless of masters. It has taken possession of the two planes, the physical and the mental. From there it governs the world with a rod of iron. But we can, and, with the help of the great law, we will someday overcome that law of polarity and be free again. The law of rhythm. Everything in the world, in the present state of human consciousness, inhales and exhales, goes up and down by compensated oscillations. This law is also called the law of the pendulum, because its operations are in a way similar to the swinging of the pendulum. The pendulum goes up one side, down again, up again, and so on. That law operates in our life on two planes, the physical and the mental, in many different ways. To start with, its functioning on the physical, material plane will be explained. This is especially noticeable in waves during a storm on the sea or on any other body of water where waves are brought forth by a storm. The following design shows how the energy of the wave is directed by that law, and the upward and forward movement of energy carries the wave higher and higher until it reaches a culminant point. Then comes a moment when, through its own weight, the wave breaks down and falls, seemingly to continue again its forward and upward movement. That is only an appearance. However, in reality, the energy which has raised that wave, after it has reached its highest point, does not proceed at all the way it seems to. The law of rhythm entirely reverses its movement. After it has reached the culminant point, it suddenly turns within and goes all the way down and backward until it reaches the farthest point back, the point where it started its forward movement. And when it has reached the farthest and lowest point, then it starts to go up again, first under the water as an invisible, propulsory force, then appearing on the surface again as a wave, to reach its climax and then start back again under the water. A certain part of its forward movement is done on the surface as a wave, but all its backward movement and a part of its forward movement are done under the water, unseen but still most strongly operating. That is how the waves of the ocean are moving. Every swimmer knows that undercurrent. It is called the undertow, which is so dangerous because it sucks in. But how few realize that it is all due to the operation, on the physical plane, of the law of rhythm. As on the physical plane, so also does the law of rhythm operate on the mental plane, because in both instances it is governed by the one immutable great law. We, who consciously live on these two planes, are under that law of rhythm as long as we have not learned how to rise above it. As are the waves on the ocean, so is humanity's evolution. It goes forward and upwards until it reaches the highest point, then begins the decline into its backward movement. It goes down with ever-increasing speed until it reaches its lowest and farthest point, from which it starts its climb again. As we see the energy of the ocean moving partly on the surface of the water as a wave, partly under the water as the undertow, so it is also with humanity's evolution. The progress of humanity begins to be noticeable only when the law of rhythm becomes apparent in social life, just like the visible waves on the ocean, the beginning of whose ascending movement remains unseen under the water, until it bursts forth as a visible wave. But all the important work was really done, so to say, in the secrecy of the ocean itself. The silent, unseen progress is due to the hidden forward movement. When the backward movement starts, at first it is almost unnoticeable, but its speed increases all the time until it has reached the lowest point. There again, as in the ocean, the backward movement is not so much seen as felt. On the surface things seem to be still moving forward, but there is the undertow, which sucks in and down all those who are not strong enough to resist that backward and downward movement. The backward movement is so strong as to bring humanity almost to the same point from which it started, and the little gain still made is due exclusively to the operation of another law called the law of evolution, which in some measure counteracts the operation of the law of rhythm. And if we would express in mathematical figures the advancing movement of the human race, and then its receding movement, due to that law, they would read as follows. In the forward movement, humanity has in its progress advanced, metaphorically speaking, 12 feet, but when the backward movement starts, the law of rhythm throws humanity back 11 feet, 11 3/4 inches, and the whole progress is thus reduced to 1/4 of an inch. That is the reason why humanity's evolution is so very slow. We have lived countless ages and yet we have progressed comparatively very little, all because of that law of rhythm. If it were not for that law, which keeps it back, humanity would long ago have solved its problems of evolution. That law would have kept humanity for eternity in its clutches, if there were not the law of evolution, which states that all vibrations tend naturally to rise upwards in the scale of eternal harmony. That law is a ray of hope, sent by love to suffering humanity to uplift it, to counteract to some extent the operation of the law of rhythm. Because of that law of evolution, we see all vibrations always striving upwards in spite of the law of rhythm working continually against it. It will be explained now how that law of rhythm works in our daily lives. Most of us have had the experience that there are certain days when everything is successful and other days when anything we start is a failure. It is the upward and downward movement of the law of rhythm which produces these differences. It must be remembered that as there are big waves on the ocean, there are also smaller waves. Each big wave is made up of smaller ones, and each little wave is governed by the same law and manifests the same kind of movement, forward and backward, as does the big wave. The law of rhythm working in identically the same way on all waves. Men of business also know that law, sometimes consciously, most of the time unconsciously. There are certain periods in their business when things go well, and periods when things do not go well. Those periods are sometimes long, sometimes short, just like waves on the ocean, and they repeat themselves. In history, certain facts also continually repeat themselves, and we then say, history repeats itself. It is the law of rhythm which is the underlying cause of those forward and backward movements. People who have been successful in their life are those who have mastered that law. That is, they acted like good swimmers on a stormy sea. When the law started to draw them back, they did not lose courage or begin to fear. On the contrary, again like good swimmers, they courageously did their best not only to remain afloat on the top of the wave, but to swim so vigorously as to advance even in spite of the opposing current, until by and by, at each attempt, they won some point. The result was that finally those waves, instead of drawing them backward, really began to carry them onwards. Sometimes it may be a slower, other times a quicker movement, but it will always be a forward movement. There is no longer any backward movement possible. Under those conditions, when it happens on the water of the sea, we say the storm is over. When it happens in our life, we say we have mastered unsuccess. We are successful. If one analyzes the lives of most successful people, no matter to what department of life they may belong, be it religion, science, business, statesmanship, arts or politics, one will find that any man or woman who has ever been successful has had the same experience. In the beginning, great hardships, handicaps and failures, yet they persevered, failing maybe hundreds of times, but advancing still, full of energy, and still hoping that someday they would meet with success. One day they did meet with success, and that day they neutralized that law to the extent that we humanly can in our present state of consciousness. Even then that law can bring them a little down, but still it always remains a forward movement. Now there is the question, how to neutralize that law and take advantage of its forward and upward movements. The first thing to do when we see that the law of rhythm is carrying us backwards is not to fear, not to be discouraged, and to try to swim as vigorously as we can against the opposing current. Even if, in spite of our efforts, we are carried far back and deep down, after all it does not matter how much backwards we are carried by the law. The important point which we must always keep in mind is that someday, because it is the law of rhythm, it must start again its forward and ascending movement. Being a law, it must be true to itself. Therefore, even at its worst, there is always a hope for us that we will leave the bottom someday, if we will persevere, and if we do not let ourselves be discouraged and remain on the bottom like a stone which cannot be carried forward by the ascending movement of the law. That is why we say that a man may be down but not out. When the bottom is reached, then the ascending movement starts, and finally the highest point is reached. Wise people know that then is the time to be careful. We can master the law, yet we must watch it till we have really overcome it. That does not mean to fear the law, but to be cautious, and when we see the backward movement starting again, to polarize ourselves on the positive and simply refuse to be carried back, like a good swimmer fighting the undertow. When the law of rhythm begins its backward movement, we must persevere in what we already have on band, because it is our duty to hold on to that. But we must never start anything new once the backward movement has set in. It usually turns out to be a failure. Naturally, if one can stand through the backward movement till it has reached its very lowest point, then someday one may become successful. But why waste all that energy in order to fight the backward movement, when it is much easier and more rational to wait for the ascending movement of the law? Success will come then by simply waiting for the positive operation of the law. Thus we will have saved all the energy which otherwise would have been wasted in fighting, and then we can use it to better advantage in combining it with the forward movement of the law of rhythm. In our lives we all have periods of success and periods of unsuccess due to the operation of that law. Therefore, whenever we see that we are on the way to success, we must do all we can during that time in order to take in every direction every possible advantage of the positive side of the law of rhythm. That law is an automatic, unconscious law, but we are conscious. We can, therefore, outwit the law, and we have for that the divine authority and help, because it is a transitory law which we must someday overcome. Like the law of polarity, it originated when our involution into material consciousness started, and it will disappear when we will have evolved out of that state of consciousness. Take, for instance, that story in the Bible, the dream of Pharaoh about the 7 fat cows and the 7 lean cows which ate up the 7 fat cows and still remained lean. It was the law of rhythm which the Pharaoh perceived in a dream and which Joseph was able to interpret correctly. Joseph was wise. He knew the operation of the law of rhythm and how to overcome it, and so he said, "During the 7 prosperous years, gather and bring together all you can." That is, use the upward movement of the law of rhythm to the very limit in every direction. And then when you will have received all which can be obtained during those 7 prosperous years, when the years of famine, or the backward movement, will start, you will have everything ready to meet that backward movement, and being prepared, you will thus overcome the law. We should and can do just the same and follow the example of the Pharaoh. When the forward movement of the law of rhythm starts, let us use its power in every possible direction. No matter what we will endeavor to do during that time, it is bound to be a success. But when the backward movement starts again, then we must be careful, watch, and refuse to be carried away by that movement. The more we act that way, the more and more do we neutralize that law, and by we will notice that those backward movements will become weaker and weaker till they will disappear entirely, leaving only the forward movements. When we have reached that condition, the storm on the sea of our lives will come to an end, and we can say we have mastered that law of rhythm. The negative operation of it will cease, leaving only the positive force, which then will help us all the time. The following design shows how the law of rhythm operates when consciously mastered. It is very necessary for us to know those laws and their operation because we are seemingly so helpless when confronted with them. People become so frightened by their manifestations that they grow superstitious. Somebody says, "How well you look," or "How successful you are in your business." Immediately most people would tap wood. Why? To counteract so-called negative influences. The superstition that we must tap wood was really brought on because people noticed that whenever a compliment about their good health or success was made, soon some misfortune happened to the one who was complimented. Back of all that trouble are those 2 transitory laws, the law of polarity and the law of rhythm. Many superstitions were brought forth to meet those laws, but in reality they were never able to do so. It is only our mental attitude, the knowledge of the operation of the laws, and faith in our God-given power to overcome them, which enable us to master those laws.